Basically, it starts in the prisons. It starts in the art rooms in the prison. It starts with prisoners coming to make paintings and drawings, pottery, various crafts, timber, teachers, schools. The Arts Council sends in visiting artists. The teachers and the arts officer, the arts development officer, Tom, Tom Short, who, you know, gave an enormous commitment to this show. It's like every operation has somebody who is very invisible, who it doesn't happen if they don't show up. And in terms of making this happen, he was the one who pulled it all together. So, but it starts with the prisoners, and within the prisoners' heart and mind, that they use this language, visual language. It's kind of strange in going around the prisons. You realize, talking to staff there, talking to teachers, that you know, I remember about 20, 30 years ago, Noel Sheridan, the late Noel Sheridan, who was director of the College of Art, arguing that, you know, where they had a requirement of 2 languages to get to university. He said, well, visual arts, the art is another language. It should be accepted as part of that. And, you know, I don't think it ever was. You know, but it's as valid as English and French, Irish, this visual language. For some reason, it is really suitable to a prison where people are locked up and sensory deprived, and you know, they're not, the long vista is taken from them. In those circumstances, the conditions of prison are the same conditions of the studio. You know, you have reflection, you have, well, you don't have silence, but prisons are very noisy places, but you have reflection and time. And out of this comes this amazing imaginative statement that we have here. So I'd say the exhibition logically came from the artists who made it. For me, it was very important to go to each of the prisons because, you know, the show is here, and we make a video. We send the video back, and they see it. But, you know, if the curator goes into your studio and talks to you about the work and gives you some sense of why they're selecting this or that, it's real. It's something that happened. And if we hadn't have done that, the same people the person meets every day would pick up the work. All that the person would see would be the work going from the room that it's in. You know, by us coming in and meeting the people who made this work, we managed to give some presence to this exhibition before it was put together. So we met most of the people who've made this work. We had to have a presence in the prison, and they have a presence here. You know, it's a kind of equitable exchange. So for that reason, I mean, the work could have come to a central depot, and we looked at it and made the selection. Often that's done with open submission shows, and this was an open submission show. But it was better, in my view, that we went to each of the jails and talked with the people who was there. I had worked in all those places, but I hadn't been in, well, it wasn't true that I had never been in. I mean, I've been back the odd time, but it's 19 years since I actually worked as a teacher on the ground in any prison. So I was going back, revisiting places, and some were new, some didn't exist back then. Some were exactly the same, down to the very decoration of the room. But some were brand new, and there was new standards of architecture, of a new standard of rooms. Because some rooms are from the 18th century, and some rooms are from the 21st century. Believe me, there's a difference, So to me, it was, most of the people were new. I did meet the odd person that I had worked with 20 years ago, and that was very interesting. But most of the people in custody were new. Hadn't met them before. The language here, there's imaginative drawing based on comics, as a kind of history to comic books, which is the wallpaper. It's completely invented. There's a work in the catalogue. There's a work behind me here on this wall, which is put close to the word Dostoevsky is across the page from it. If ever appropriate placing, this was it. So there's some of the work speaks of prison in a very frightening way. Some of the work is very sophisticated, like the piece beside me here, which is to do with identity, because part of the rules, or not necessarily rules, but part of the duty of care to prisoners or to people in custody is that they're not held up. There's no sandwich. The old, what do you call them? The board that people were put into, and then people threw rotten fruit at them. And to a certain extent, that very ancient tradition is carried by the certain types of media today, in that the prisoners are used as spectacle for. So the idea of the department, or the Irish Prison Service, to protect the anonymity of the people it has in custody is taken quite seriously. And so for me, I've no doubt that it's an attitude of protection and care. But at the same time, you lose your name. So these men decided that they would deal with their identity through their fingerprint. And this here is, these things contain the fingerprint of the people who made them. So that's a very sophisticated approach to this situation, and finding a resolution of personal identity within the confines of anonymity. Where else can I go? Over here is a work where the man has basically gone through his childhood when he used to fish with his brother, and then invented stories which are completely invented about, polar bears, a whole family of polar bears getting into the boat and upsetting it on a local Irish river where we don't have polar bears. So like the imagination moves. There's a video by a young man who has used kind of Photoshop to present the Africa of his childhood back to us in a video. There's sculpture used. There's one piece which I know came out of a workshop with Catherine Carman, the sculptor, which is about the visit. You know, the very close to it is a kind of ordinary enough painting, but the artist has increased the scale so that the lock is huge, you know, and probably as it should be. Another work, tiny head with a balaclava, a reflection on what got them there. You know, the double portrait, the double painting, one of a cell window in Loughlin House up in Blacklion, and the other one is of the lake that's there. So, you know, you have the confinement and non-confinement right beside each other. These people are telling you stories about who they are, where they are, and they're telling them to you with material, and the material varies. I mean, there's a number of paintings of the cell. I can see 3 from here. You know, the cell window is a big thing when you're inside. It's if you want a pattern, that's here. And the other thing is freedom. And here you have they find the drawing of animals as being an expression of freedom. The women in this exhibition, the pictures of women are all by women, which is an unusual event. There's about 160 works here. The majority are by men, but a small amount by women. But those are the pictures of women. They come from the women themselves, and I think that's unusual for a show, because mostly women are depicted by men. You know, when you get this amount of men in a show, that's what you'll get, a certain amount of that. Art in prison is like water in a desert. You know, it's you know, most of the men I worked with and women were did not have second level education, much less third level. The primary school, now it has changed somewhat in the last 20 years, but prior to that, the average education level was quite low. However, this did not pose a problem, because the universities in Ireland accept matriculation through experience. And people who are over the age of 23 are not required to have a Leaving Cert. In other words, they're not required to have second level to enter university. They're required to demonstrate capacity for reflection and writing. But they do that, but they're not required to have had second level. So that was kind of the person I met. I met people who had life experience and were capable of, and desired to translate it by doing art. And you know, many people have found livelihoods from that course that we did those years ago in Portlaoise Prison. Eddie Cahill has worked as an artist. He's had over 30 shows. Jimmy Leonard has, completed a BA, is going in to do a master's, has done work with Maynooth University and so forth. There's many others I would say there's a greater proportion of people in prison doing art than in any schools. This structure in any VC schools, if you compared, I think the fact that people are adults is an important aspect to it. It allows a safe form of self-expression. You know, painting is a peculiar business because you can do anything you like with it, and you cannot offend anybody with it. It's very almost impossible. If people find offence in a painting, there's something wrong with them, not the painting, because it stays quiet. It doesn't say anything other than what you see in it. You know, so it's a means to express ourselves, and very important. The funny thing is, I was always amazed by this. I was 10 years in the College of Art teaching, or administrating and teaching. And I was 15 years in the prisons, working both as an artist and as a teacher. And yet, I made many paintings from my experience of prison. I made only one from my experience of being in education. And I thought that prison was a very real place. It was utterly real. People were in custody, deprived of their liberty. It was absolutely real. Whereas the kind of methodology of education was that you prepared people by having them practice at something. So the BAs did one show, and the MAs, the show didn't have to be wholly original at BA level, but at MA it had to be. But they were just proving they could do it, which is different than doing it. I don't know if that makes sense, but you have to get very high up in education before there's the doctorate level requires that the subject that you're studying be absolutely new, be original, be necessary, and be readable. That anyone can understand it. So you have to be at that level before common sense comes in. But somehow or other, the prison was, common sense entered the minute you went in there. You could see the deprivation that the thing is. People are deprived of their liberty. They're held. It's contrary to all human nature, what happens. There's a time limit. And I know that when I started going there, I found it emotionally crippling. And of course, that doesn't last. No matter what you're dealing with, you adjust, and it doesn't affect you, and you go on. Whether there's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not going to say, but after about 3 months, I was able to go in and do something else the day after. But at the beginning, I couldn't. I was shocked by it. And I'm not being critical of anyone other than the architecture, to be honest. The stone, people living in stone cells, a huge amount of gates, the noise of the gates. Nobody thinks of prison until, for some reason or other, they go in. Nobody ever imagines they'll go in. Though it's interesting that the pattern of going to jail can be established within families. And the fathers go, the grandfathers go, the sons go, and they go back to the same prisons. And they come from the same addresses. I found that the people in custody came in any part of the country roughly from the same place. Now this was when the whole discovery of the abuse that went on in Ireland, within institutions that held young people, that was the first change in the demographics of prisoners, because it started coming from a different class at that stage. But mostly up to then, almost everybody came from the same address. And in those days, everybody that went to university came from the same address too. This was a nice divide in society. I'm not saying this is the whole story, because there was a vast number of people in the middle who didn't go to university and didn't go to prison. But it was significant that it was the same people going to both, and that continued. During the economic expansion, it changed. Everybody went to university. Not the expansion, but the period of the boom. Education became an option for everyone in the country. I'm saying that prison was part of the real world, and therefore it influenced my work. It certainly gave me an understanding of society to such an extent that whenever I work abroad, I try and get into the prison in the city I'm working in. I've been in Juarez, I spent a lot of time, and I managed to get into that prison. I've shows there next month, and I hope to do the same again. I've certainly asked the museum to try and arrange it. The director didn't want to go in with me though.